began. Our relationship began, actually I was working at Walmart, and in the evening one day we were talking about President Eisenhower, and none of the people about my age that I was working with at Walmart knew who President Eisenhower was. So I'd read an article that Mary was in Kansas City at that time. I looked her up and said, Mary, would you come and speak at Marshfield High School about the Eisenhowers? And she graciously accepted, and thus this began a long time, very dear friendship. And during that visit, Mary made a comment that little did she know from planting a seed would turn into such a monster. She said, just casually, if you're a historian and you're interested in history, you have to travel to different presidential libraries and birthplaces and sites. There's no central place to go to learn about everybody. Well, that began to fester, and when we planted cherry blossom trees, I thought, well, Marshfield's the center of the nation. What would be better than to come to Marshfield to learn about history, our presidents, their families? And so I've always said that Mary really should get credit for being the mother of the Cherry Blossom Festival. Yeah. To speak about her grandmother, and she has Mamie Pink on today, put your hands together for my dear friend, Mary Eisenhower.
I love you. Can you hear me all right? Can you hear me now? Sorry, what? Okay. Well, good morning, and it's so great to be back at Cherry Blossom for real. You know, frankly, I'm thrilled not to be on Zoom. How about everybody else? The only thing I like about Zoom is if you have something you have to do, you can mute it, and you can cut the video too, so you can scream at the cat to get down, you know, and all that, and then get back on like nothing happened, and you know, continue with your meeting. But other than that, it's no fun because you're not there in person, and it's so great to be quote unquote home again. I love this festival. It's year after year, it's like just wonderful souls crossing, and I stay at a bed and breakfast where we planted cherry trees about 10 years ago, and you know, there's still some blooms on them, and I think, yeah, we planted that tree, you know, and so it's really got a lot of history for me personally, and I'm glad that Nicholas isn't calling me the grandmother of the festival, but anyway, I missed you all tremendously last year, but we're here now in the season of renewal, and with all the promises it brings. There is light at the end of the tunnel, and that's good news for our country. I want to thank Nicholas and the Cherry Blossom Festival for giving me the opportunity to share the story of an extraordinary and beautiful lady, inside and out, Mamie Geneva Dowd Eisenhower. I've often said she was not just the first lady, but the perfect lady. My father, John, was Ike and Mamie's only surviving son. John married Barbara Thompson, and they had 4 children, David, Ann, Susan, and Mary Jean. I'm Mary Jean. I used to feel bad about being the youngest, as I was born at the end of Granddad's first term in office, and so often as kids will be kind of, you know, sibling rivalry. They would tell, you know, funny family stories or whatever, and then they'd look at me and say, that happened before you were born. But actually, on the other side of that, now it's like, okay, so what decade are you in? I'm the very youngest grandchild. Sorry, I'm technically challenged. Down here, okay. I was trying to send us back to the beginning. There we go. Okay, Carl and Mary Carlson, Mamie's grandparents, immigrated from Sweden and spoke Swedish in the home. After several tries in Boston and the West Coast, they ultimately settled at 420 Manoa Street in Boone, Iowa. There's a trivia hiccup. When Carl and Mary went through immigration, they were asked for their names, at which time Carl said, Carl Severin Jeremiahson. And the official didn't understand and didn't want to deal with it, so recorded him as Carl Carlson, which became the family name. Oops. Okay. Elvira Matilda Carlson Dowd was their fourth child of 6. When she married John Sheldon Dowd, they settled a block and a half away from the Elvira's parents on Manoa Street to Carroll Street in Boone, Iowa, the house that Mamie was born in. Elvira's brother Joel, Mamie's uncle, lived in the family home at 420 Manoa his entire life of 98 years, including during the time he was married to Carolyn, his wife, who passed away in 1960. He was a widower for the last 18 years of his life. Mamie was one of 4 girls born to Elvira and John. The family moved to 750 Lafayette Street in Denver, Colorado, which would be on your right side, when Mamie was 2.5. John retired from the meatpacking industry when he and Elvira married. Elvira was 15 when they married. John was 35. And there's Mamie's parents and Mamie at age 17 in the middle. The John Dowd family adopted a snowbird lifestyle. After they moved to Denver, they also acquired a winter home in San Antonio, Texas. Shown are some family pictures. On the left back of the photo are, on the left-hand side, are John and Elvira Dowd with Eleanor, Mamie's sister, in front of them. On the right are Joel and Carolyn, the uncle I mentioned, with Mamie in front of them, taken in Boone. On the right is a family portrait of the Dowd family taken in Denver. The back row is Francis Mabel, otherwise known as Mike, and then John, and then Eleanor, Mamie's other sister, and Mamie. The front row seats Edna May, otherwise known as Buster. They have lots of nicknames for each other, and Elvira. Mamie was the second in the line of the 4 girls. Buster sadly passed away in 1912 at the age of 18, and Eleanor in 1918 at the age of 17, leaving Mamie and Mike as the surviving sisters. Okay, as mentioned earlier, when the Dowds moved to Denver, they also acquired a snowbird home in San Antonio, Texas. Mamie had become a visible socialite in Denver and a graduate of the finishing school, Wolcott School for Girls in Denver, Colorado. While visiting San Antonio during late year activities in 1915, Mamie went frequently with her girlfriends to Fort Sam Houston. At a mixer between the officers and locals, Mamie met an Army second lieutenant just graduated from West Point the previous June by the name of Dwight David, aka Ike Eisenhower. The two were immediately smitten with each other and started to court as soon as they met. Courting consisted of Mamie visiting Ike on post, many long walks, and talks. They did not date like we think of it. They didn't go out to dinner. He was very restricted because of his duty. Their friends urged them on, much to the chagrin of her mother, who, upon learning of the courtship, was upset. Actually had to take to her bed for a couple of days, and she said that he was a military man and he wouldn't amount to anything. But so upset. When Ike asked for Mamie's hand in marriage just 3 months after they met, she's saying, "This doesn't look good," She was sure it wouldn't last. The two became engaged on February 14th, 1916. Adding to her mother's angst, they wanted to be married as soon as possible, with World War I ensuing and the possibility of Ike being deployed. The prominent Dowds relented to their daughter, and Ike and Mamie were married the following July 1st, 1916, a short 8 months after they met. However, her mother thought the engagement was too fast and improper. Therefore, a wealthy socialite wedding, as her mother she had dreamed of, was not planned. Rather, a simple ceremony with a handful of relatives took place in the Dowd home in the living room at 750 Lafayette Street. So it was like a shotgun wedding without the baby. Shown here are some of the designers' sketches that created the Mamie look from the 1950s. She said she needed the bangs to cover the high Carlson forehead she had inherited. On the left is an Elizabeth Arden sketch for her hair. The middle photo shows Mamie in the yard in Boone at age 2.5. It might be noted she knew how to pose, but even at such a tender age, but she's like swallowed up with all the lace and all that. I just think that's the funniest picture, and her expression is not happy, but she posed for the picture. She was a good girl. The right is a fashion sketch by designer Molly Paris for Mamie. Arnold Scazzi was her favorite designer, and he also designed for Barbara Bush, which was interesting. At one White House event, Mamie went in a Parnas dress that was assured to her to be one of a kind. As she descended the staircase to greet her guests, one of her guests greeted her with the same dress on. This could have been extremely embarrassing. However, Mamie's response was a big smile, and she put her hand out and shook it and said, "My dear, I hope our dress looks half as good on me as it does on you." So these are some examples of Mamie's early fashions. I get a kick out of this series as she looks so elusive and enticing at the same time, except for the expression in the garden. I think that kind of gives her away. She was not particularly outdoorsy, but she's kind of being dutiful and letting her picture being made, but she wasn't happy. I'd like to point out that Mamie was always proper with her poses, even with unusual circumstances surrounding her, shown with her hands folded properly for her little pose, even with the mule going bananas behind her. But there she is, posed and waiting for the picture, and the mule's going crazy. The picture to the left is Ike and Mamie's engagement photo, and she was emphatic that people know that was her engagement photo and not her wedding gown. She actually made me promise to tell people if I shared that photograph that was not her wedding dress, that was her engagement picture. And Mamie and Ike had an incredible love story. The two could have not been raised more differently. They were polar opposites, but the love there was through all aspects of life. They were pure soulmates. And I often blame the demise of my own marriage on them because they set the standard so high. I was kind of expecting that fairy tale to transcend, and it's not very realistic. It's very rare to have the kind of love that they had. Next, Ike and Mamie are photographed as newlyweds in front of the doors of St. Louis College in San Antonio, the town that served as their honeymoon home. I feel very lucky. I visited Fort Sam a couple of years ago, and they took me to where they had lived. They lived in actually Ike's bachelor officer quarters. And it was chained up as it was scheduled for demolition in a few months. But they took the chains off of Ike and Mamie's apartment and let me in to see it. And there was still some quartermaster furniture in it, and lovely molding and built-ins and a beautiful fireplace. But it was very small, 2 rooms and a small kitchen. And I imagine it was an adjustment for Mamie just on size alone. But I got to see that, and it's since been raised. So, and next shown are Mamie and Ike on their 40th wedding anniversary on the grounds of their Gettysburg home. The farm was the first and only home they actually owned together. They had always lived in military housing or university housing and the White House. Actually, as a kid, I thought the White House was theirs, and I didn't realize that there wasn't a mortgage on it and that it didn't belong to them. I just thought they lived in a big house. They bought the farm in 1952 and renovated it as the house and barn were Civil War era. They left the original kitchen on the back of the house, which was transformed into a den and office area. It was kind of Granddad's man cave. It was the only piece of the house that wasn't decorated in like Victorian. It was cowboys and leathers and different patterns. And I always joke and say that was his man cave. It was the one room she gave him. The hearth was unique stone. It still had the bread oven and a large hanging pot where the original family used to cook. They decorated it cowboy western as opposed to the rest of the home. At one point, they were breaking ground for a rose bed when they discovered a Confederate soldier's bones. The workers went to Mamie to ask her what to do, and she very sensitively said, "Move the bed, let him rest in peace." Anniversaries anniversaries were very important to Mamie. Originally, the wedding she had dreamed of all of her life didn't happen. Rather, the ceremony was quite humble, as I mentioned earlier. The most important one to her, though, was their 50th wedding anniversary, or their golden. They had a huge celebration at my parents' home in Valley Forge. It was a white tie affair. The excitement she had over it is something I'll never forget. She wore a gold brocade skazi gown and was radiant. Later, after we became very close, and I'll tell you more about that later, she told me emphatically that she wanted to be buried in it, along with her wedding ring. She had finally gotten the wedding of her lifelong dream to her beloved Ike without controversy, just joy. After being an Army wife for most of her life, Mamie found herself the First Lady of the United States of America. As I became an Army wife myself, she advised on Army living, moving every couple of years, that you can make any place home. Just throw your rugs down and put the collectibles out and you're home. Ike wrote that Mamie was a good sport, and I'm paraphrasing, but he was referring particularly to when they were stationed in Panama, where, quote, there was a lot of vermin and such that didn't appeal to her. So she was brave in her own way. Shown here are Ike and Mamie riding the inaugural parade in 1953. I think it's interesting that they were secure enough that the motorcade was a convertible. Next one is of the White House Christmases. One particular memory from that year that I still cherish is being with Dolores in the solarium on the 3rd floor of the White House. She had gathered me up quickly, and I couldn't figure out why she was so excited. The solarium had a plate glass window. It was dark out, but she didn't turn the lights on. She said that Granddad was about to light the national Christmas tree, and I couldn't quite get my arms around that, which was in the distance across the street. I felt skeptical, as I didn't think that was possible. Then suddenly the tree lit up, and I saw Granddad's shadowy figure. It was like he had come straight from the heavens. I thought he was some kind of god. It was just like, all of a sudden, there's the tree. The next is my first Easter. Here's a family pose in the Rose Garden. I'm in Mimi's arms. When that picture was taken, I had no idea how very much the person holding me would affect my life and how her love would influence me forever. Mamie spent most of her mornings in bed as she had a rheumatic heart. And as I mentioned earlier, she'd already lost 2 sisters to various things. And we're not really sure of what Eleanor died of in 1918, but now having had COVID around, I kind of figure it might have been the Spanish flu, because grandmother was a real germaphobe, and I never understood why, and then finally I kind of put 2 and 2 together, and it makes sense to me now. So as not to draw attention, though, that she had a rheumatic heart, she had a philosophy that people should feel better after they've talked to you, rather than you do, it was like a human responsibility to make sure that people were happy when they left you. So she didn't like to emphasize things that were wrong with her. So she used to say every lady should be able to stay in bed in the mornings and a whole day once a month. So one of my first memories I have was waking up between the 2 of them in their room at the White House. I did notice that she looked much different at night than during the day. She was soothing me. Apparently, I had had a bad dream. And that was good with me because there was something about her that when she said everything would be all right, that I knew it would. She had a huge wardrobe of bed jackets because she did stay in bed in the morning, but she did work from bed. They were all in either pastel blue or pink. And her hair and appearance were impeccable, to include a matching ribbon to whatever color bed jacket she was wearing. This is when she would plan the dinners and answer correspondence. And she had a policy to answer every letter that came to her attention personally. This was a practice all of her adult life. She saved her incoming letters forever, and a large amount of them are in the Eisenhower Library today. I still have the ones she wrote to me, and I cherish them. Her correspondence was a passion to her. Her letters always had such nice things to say and were very newsy. She said many times that the whole point to a conversation was so other people would walk away happier because they were with you. And this held true in her letters as well. Shown here are pictures of Dowd, lovingly referred to as Icky. I think it started out as a nickname for Ikey. But as all toddlers are, they started joking and calling him Icky, and it stuck. It was said with much love. On the left is Icky as a toddler, breaking the rules at such a tender age. He's on the grass. On the right was taken at their first home, which was actually in Gettysburg, when Granddad was stationed at nearby Fort Meade, Maryland. This was 1918, the year of the Spanish flu and the year that Eleanor died. Ike recalled getting home one afternoon before Mamie. He had already been informed of Eleanor's passing. He said it was one of the most difficult days of his life, waiting for her to tell her that a second sister had passed. And as I said earlier, we had not been able to clearly define in any research what Eleanor died of, but I'm pretty sure it was probably the Spanish flu. The most heartbreaking, though, was the death of their first son, Dwight, of scarlet fever when he was only 3.5 years old. Ike was once asked for everything that he had been through his life, 2 world wars, a presidency, what was the most difficult? Without missing a beat, he said the death of his son. Things were never the same after that. It was a sad death. In late 1920, Ike had been serving a lot of temporary duty, separating Mamie from him, and they were still fairly newlywed. Finally, on one assignment, Mamie decided to go with him as kind of a honeymoon. They interviewed nannies so that Mamie and I could be alone together. They chose what they thought was the perfect one. There was a common question in such interviews that the caretaker had been exposed to any contagious diseases. This interviewee did not disclose that she had been exposed to scarlet fever and was a carrier. She passed the disease on to Dowd, and Dowd suffered for months and finally died on January 2nd, 1921. Every year after that, Ike sent Mamie flowers on Dowd's birthday, September 24th, for the rest of their lives. Nicely, though, my father wasn't very far away. He was born at the Dowd home on August of 1922, and the three remained very tight and close for the rest of their lives. Okay, the first shown is a picture of Mamie and Johnny, as she called him, taken at the Dowd home in Denver when Johnny was a little over a year old. The second picture is taken at Rock Creek Park in the D.C. area on the Maryland side. Daddy has his Boy Scout uniform on, ultimately ending up an Eagle Scout in his Boy Scout career. Mamie often this is the Philippines. Mamie often spoke lovingly of their time in the Philippines. She really enjoyed it. Daddy was a teenager and excelled in school. Granddad was able to be at home every night, and they were able to enjoy a nice and unique lifestyle. On the left is the family at Clark Air Force Base. There are several pictures of them at this spot. I was able to visit the former Clark Air Base a few years back when I was doing some humanitarian work in the Philippines. And this spot exists exactly as it looks in that picture. And I was able to have my own picture taken where they stood, which was really fun. I also got to see the Manila Hotel, which is where they lived, as did MacArthur, but in very different accommodations. MacArthur had, I think, a 3,000 square foot suite, and Granddad had a room and a bathroom. So, and that suite they've left intact, so you can tour it, and it was quite something. And the second picture is of Mamie pinning a Distinguished Service Star on Granddad, awarded to him by the government of the Philippines. Oh, I accidentally hit I didn't know I had a pointer. That's good. Mamie often spoke lovingly of their time in the Philippines. I'm sorry, wrong note. Mamie's humanitarian side and her true love of people and causes was an inspiration to me all of my life. These pictures do not begin to show her many, many works, all for others. However, she had an interesting philosophy. I was talking to her about women's liberation. This was in the 1970s, and when the Equal Rights Amendment was floating around and being debated. She said she didn't understand what that even meant. She said she had all the career she ever needed in Ike. And I thought, okay, well, you know, she's just this old-fashioned gal. But she did. She credited her efforts and support to him. Truth be told, they were a true team. And she was an activist in her own way. She was like the poster child for the American Heart Association. And she worked with muscular dystrophy, as you can see there. And while he was at war, she waitressed at a canteen, and there she is in her uniform. And that uniform is still on display at the Eisenhower Library. And she was very perceptive about just common sense things every day. For example, their first year in office, 1953, she paid attention to the annual Easter egg roll. She realized that the event never included, it was never diversified or included African Americans or anything. Well, that Easter egg roll was integrated and has been integrated ever since. After Mamie in her uniform, in her canteen uniform, the next is taken at the White House while she meets and engages with a poster child for muscular dystrophy. And then, as I said, Mamie was very active with the American Heart Foundation and celebrated her 60th birthday with them. She was given an American Heart Foundation award that evening by Pat Nixon. And next she's visiting Washington inner city school. And I think from the expression on her face, you can tell how very much she loved children. Okay, France and the de Gaulles. Paris was one of Mamie's favorite stations. The war was over and Granddad headed SHAPE, Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe, which was the precursor to NATO. They lived in a beautiful chateau directly in Paris. De Gaulle and Eisenhower had a deep respect for each other, which continued from the war through the rest of their lives. Not shown is a very touching picture of the two of them at Camp David sitting in front of the fireplace in their silk bathrobes just talking. That same visit, Granddad brought de Gaulle to the farm in Gettysburg for an overnight visit so that he could see a different side of the country rather than New York City or DC. They scoured the battlefield together, which was kind of interesting, the two of them checking out the Civil War battlefield. Then that evening there was a progressive dinner of sorts. And for those of you who have heard me talk before, please forgive me, this may be a repeat. But my family lived in a home with abutting property to the farm, and they started at our house for drinks and starters, and then everyone was to proceed to the farm for the rest of dinner. When President de Gaulle arrived at our house, he had himself an interpreter because he refused to speak English, and a secretary. He was on a state visit. In turn, Granddad and Mamie came, also an interpreter, Secret Service, and a secretary. Between all of them, my parents, siblings, and by the time I got into the room, youngest, there were no seats left. At the grand age of 3, and I still remember this like it's yesterday, I spotted de Gaulle and assumed it was another one of Granddad's dear friends because they were always so nice to each other, of which I had seen a lot of. I did know that everybody was making a huge fuss over him, so I thought he must be a good guy. So in spotting him, I went over and simply sat on his lap. He looked to me as a grandfatherly sort, but he continued speaking to Granddad through the interpreters without acknowledgement of me at all. But it didn't bother me. I was 3. I proceeded to explain to him that I was wearing a smock dress, and I was telling him how smocking was made and all that. And he just, but the ice got broken when Granddad handed him a document to read, and out of his coat pocket, he pulls these Coke bottle thick red horn-rimmed glasses and sticks them on his face. In my diplomatic way at age 3, I went, "Oh, why are your glasses so thick?" And in English, he looked at me and he said, "Because I cannot see. Poor, poor me." And the whole room goes silent because everybody's like, okay, he does speak English. Yeah, so we're wondering what we've been saying. Okay. Shown here, one in particular that is special to me is that, oh, wait a minute. Yeah, I'm sorry. Shown here, one in particular that is special to me is the shot of him at the rotunda. When Granddad died, Mamie took a several-bedroom suite at the Washington Hilton where all of us stayed. My sister Susie and I decided we wanted to go to the rotunda as just, with everybody who was, passing by the coffin rather than, because otherwise we were involved with so much stuff that we had to be really stoic and we couldn't privately grieve, so we decided to go. And as this body-laden state, we got in line and we circled the coffin, and about 3/4 of the way around, suddenly there was a huge commotion at the entrance. Security encircled, but was parted when de Gaulle emerged and immediately saluted Granddad's flag-draped coffin. De Gaulle, upon learning of Granddad's death, immediately traveled to the United States before funeral invitations even went out, and came to the Capitol Rotunda straight from the airport to salute Ike, which I thought was very beautiful. And that's more of where they lived in France. Mimi loved that house, and I had the privilege when Granddad would have been 100 years old, we did kind of a footsteps throughout Europe of his, and I got to see that house and see it through her eyes, and I can understand why. It was a very peaceful, beautiful place right in the middle of chaotic Paris. So, life at Columbia College, now university, was a span in Ike's career that did not really enamor him. He did start the American Assembly in 1950, which was a think tank program covering everything from the arts to world affairs. And the program is still active today. But the time at Columbia, however, was one of rest and healing for a couple that had endured so much. While this next picture was taken at Columbia, I couldn't help when I saw it remembering her mornings at the White House. She was very sensitive to me as I was the youngest, so during her mornings in bed, I used to play in her room while she dictated letters and such to her assistant. She often quit that she did all of her business from bed. She had this wind-up ornament, a yellow bird in a brass cage that would chirp and turn when wound. I now appreciate her patience as I played with it incessantly, and it would, chirp, chirp, chirp. But anyway, she said she called it Pete after a canary her father had given her when she was little. One morning I was playing with Pete and accidentally overwound him. The key came loose and Pete stopped moving and chirping. I will never forget the expression on her face as she glared at me from over her reading glasses, one of these. Needless to say, that was an afternoon in my room. That evening we were gathered in the sitting area on the second floor. Everyone went about their conversation as though nothing had happened, while I felt guilty of murder. I then heard the elevator. Granddad was returning from the office. Of course, I never appreciated that it was the Oval Office, but anyway. And I didn't know if more punishment was in store, so I jumped up and headed him off at the pass. I told him what I had done to Mimi's Pete, and I could feel Mimi's eyes in my back. He looked at her and then back to me and said with a sympathetic smile, "Perhaps Pete could be fixed, not to worry." And we had our dinner, and then it was bedtime. And when I woke up in the next morning, I was shocked and panicked to see Pete on my bedside table. I was sure I would be in permanent trouble if she caught me with him in my room. I scooped him up and ran, pajamas and all, to the dreaded elevator, which I was terrified of. Didn't matter. I was hitting the thing to get to the second floor, where their room's located. Thinking I could sneak it in, and she would never know the difference, I ran up to the door to open it, and when I rushed there, I stopped short because there was another Pete just outside the door, just like the one I held under my arm. Somewhere in the night, Granddad got two new identical Petes. He was a peacemaker for sure, and I still have mine. Ike and Mamie were intensely devoted to family. Mamie had her way of making each of her 4 grandchildren feel like they were her favorite. That said, the family was very close-knit. Our home and property abutted the farm, and after the presidency, we saw them almost every day. I think a large part of them liked the chaos of 4, as they wanted a large family like the ones they had growing up, and they were always very supportive of our activities and fully related to them. Our interests were their interests. A good example of that was when I was in senior high. I was so elated to be a cast in the high school production of Fiddler on the Roof. I was a peasant. At this point, we had moved to Valley Forge, and I called Mamie because we were getting very close at that point. And I told her I was so enthused, and I knew she would be proud of me. After all, that was her MO. She always made us feel like she was extremely proud of us. She immediately planned to attend the performance, which over the top thrilled me, even though my part, like I said, was a mere peasant. I got so excited that I made the, in hindsight, mistake of telling my teacher, who was also the director. He went into orbit and started saying that this would be the highlight of his career. He was awestruck and that she would be there, and started lamenting his vision of presenting her with a dozen red roses during the intermission and introducing her at the beginning of the play. And while I was so happy she would be there, I admit the thought crossed my mind silently that it was supposed to be my night, and she would be there for me. Day after day, he kept raving about it in front of my friends, and it became painfully embarrassing. I tried to take my concern to the music director, who was much less of a demonstrative man, but he said there was nothing he could do for me. I did complain to my mom about the director saying all those things in front of my friends, but kept the rest to myself. The day before the play, Mom told me that Mamie was unable to come to the play, and I was heartbroken. She said, "Don't worry, Mamie was still coming to Valley Forge to see me. She wanted to see what I would look like as a peasant." I panicked and worried that the director would take me out of the play because he was so set on her coming. Mom assured me that Mamie was willing to meet him at our house before the play and have tea with him. I was so relieved Mamie didn't want the attention, but was willing to let me help me out of an unresolvable situation. So Mamie arrived the night before, and early in the afternoon of the play, the director came to our house. Mamie herself greeted him at the door, escorted him to our living room, which was complete with a silver tea service, cookies, and doily napkins. For the longest half hour of my life, they chatted and sipped their tea. Reluctantly, I had a cup with them. Mom, too. After the tea, small talk, and cookies were finished, Mamie, Mom, and I walked him to the door. I had seen Mamie turn on the sparkle and the charm before, but they were huge this time, with the two of them laughing like two school kids, with him walking on air. He left the house belly laughing, as Mamie told him, "Truly wonderful to spend time with you." I thought I was going to hurl. When she closed the door, she turned around. She was waving to him. She closes the door. She turns around and said, "You old fool." I had never heard her say anything negative about anyone, but found myself to be the one belly laughing that time. Shown here is a family dinner at a nearby restaurant while visiting my brother David, who was attending Phillips Exeter Academy. It began to blizzard that night, and I learned for the first time that Pennsylvania was not, in fact, the coldest state in the Union. It was Massachusetts. Next, Mamie is supervising us using a gift of an electric Thunderbird given to the four of us by the Mark's Toy Company in front of the entrance of the diplomatic reception room at the White House. This is, again, another probably repeat story, so forgive me for those who have heard me before. It was interesting how fairly they let us use it. We had to take turns driving it. I think it went about 1/16 of a mile an hour. I did not understand, but always when it was my turn to drive, we either all had to go do something else or, like in this picture, my big brother had to be the driver. I wanted and felt totally capable of driving it myself and became frustrated. Of course, I didn't realize that we weren't being scooped off to activities for no reason. I was too young to be driving the thing, right? But one day my sisters were at a dance class and my brother was at some boy thing, and I was, as far as the siblings go, alone. Those were different days. I was allowed to go outside and play. Security was tight for those days, but non-verboten, so I was just enjoying being outside. I was playing some kind of game and spotted the Thunderbird parked under a tree near the entrance of the diplomatic reception room. I was ecstatic. I ran over to it, and the key was in the ignition. I thought to myself, it's finally my turn. Immediately getting into the driver's seat, I'd observed enough that I knew how to turn it on, so I turned it on, and the battery was charged. Yay! So I took off at my 1/16 of a mile an hour, but my driving lessons consisted of what I'd seen in Woody Woodpecker shows, how they drove like that. So I maneuvered the wheel like in the cartoons. The next thing I knew, I was doing donuts in the semicircle in front of the diplomatic reception room. And I was not terribly sure of how to stop this when I saw the palm of a hand. It was one of the White House guards, and he was an old guy. He was at least the age of my parents. He said, "Please stop, ma'am. I believe you're speeding." I knew enough to know that speeding was against the law. And seeing my entire short life passing before my eyes, I recounted that what was always drilled into our heads, that there were two unforgivable sins in our family: lying and breaking the law. And I knew if this were to remain at bay, I would have to do one to cover the other. I was mortified. He wrote me a faux ticket, handed it to me, and then the what ifs entered my mind. What if Granddad, who was clearly the judge and jury in the family, found out? How would I ever be able to face Mamie again? She had so much confidence in my ability to be a lady, even at my young age. I received the ticket and proceeded to my room on the 3rd floor to save them the trouble of telling me to go there. I just went on my own. I went through an afternoon of totally stressing about what the consequences would be. At family time, just before dinner, Dolores came and dressed me for dinner. She took me down to a sitting area on the 2nd floor where everybody but Granddad was back at home. Mimi and Mom were engaged in conversation, and I didn't notice what any of my siblings were doing. All I wondered was who knew what. Did any of them know what a horrible thing I had done that day? After what seemed to be eternity, watching all the trouble-free conversation, I heard the elevator. And of course, it was Granddad coming home from the office. I parted the seating area and rushed to the doors of the elevator to head him off at the pass. It was obvious the rest of the family didn't know, and I wanted him to hear my side, hoping no one had told me either. I choked out my confession and his face got skewed. He said, "Let me see if I have this straight. You broke the law, but you didn't lie." "Oh, yes." "Well, you'll still have to be punished." I thought, oh man. I thought if you told the truth, you got off. I felt myself melting and I braced. "You cannot have a driver's license for at least 12 years. Thinking that was just steep, I was wishing I'd been sent to my room instead. So shown here is Mimi supporting one of Susie's horse shows. Susie was a tremendous horseback rider and won many blue ribbons in show, and apparently got one that day too because she's holding one. And next is the family in Palm Desert for Christmas. The same Joel Carlson that I showed you the picture of earlier, Mamie's uncle, was pictured, he is in that picture as an old man. He almost outlived his niece and almost had to put his own daughter into assisted living. So that was pretty remarkable. On their 50th anniversary, hostess of the world, state dinners. On their 50th anniversary, Barbara Walters asked Ike what they miss most about the White House. He said, "I miss being part of the major decisions." She, Mamie, misses the state dinners and entertaining. There was that side to Mamie, but to her credit, she was always herself and a very loving grandmother. She always had a moment, could extend her hand, and as the youngest of 4, always made sure I was included, even in the formal dinners. She tried to mold me in that she would tell me at dinner that the guest of honor always sat to the right of the hostess. Well, this is likely the custom. Now, as a grandmother myself, I know it was to keep a hand nearby. The towels on my seat and the floor under my chair might have been a clue. Still, at 3 years old, I remember her teaching me how to use a finger bowl. Rosalind Russell, this crowd might know who Rosalind Russell was, but she was an actress from the 1950s and 60s. Made this slide because right off of the state dining room was the family dining room. As you can see, we had larger holiday dinners in the state dining room. However, when extended family did not come, we'd have Thanksgiving and regular meals in the family dining room. One Thanksgiving morning, I was perplexed by my mom in kind of a flurry trying to figure out her dress and accessories. She was so excited, and she was a great dresser, so I asked her why she was so pushed. She told me that a dear friend of my grandmother's was coming for Thanksgiving and excitedly told me it was Rosalind Russell. I had no idea who she was, but she must have been someone special. We had an evening Thanksgiving that year. The family dining room was one of my favorite rooms in the White House. Mamie had it decorated in red fabrics, and by candlelight, the dimly lit crystal chandelier sparkled and reflected on the silver settings, china, and huge windows in the room. We were all seated and the soup was served. Granddad started to pick up his soup spoon, and as a rule follower, I exclaimed, "Granddad, Grace." He rolled his eyes and put his soup spoon down. He said, "You're good at Grace, you say it." The unintended consequence was he didn't consider that I was the youngest and never in charge of anything. Now I had an opening. Several years later, in 1966, Ms. Russell was making the film The Trouble with Angels, set in a convent in the Philadelphia suburbs. Mary Wicks was one of her co-stars, of whom I was very familiar with from Dennis the Menace. Anyway, Mamie told Ms. Russell that we were living in nearby Valley Forge then, and she invited my mom, my sister Susie, and me to the set and lunch. We were all seated outside of the stone building they were shooting in at long picnic tables. We were eating deli and salads family style. She was in costume. She played Mother Superior, as well as Miss Wicks, who played a nun. And after our plates were filled, we were ready to begin eating. She looked at me with an odd expression. She said, "Aren't you going to say grace?" I could feel myself blush as she continued to tell the story of my grace at Thanksgiving. She said, I thought, how could she still remember this? As she continued to recount that I thank God for everything, the food, the birds, the puppies, the family, and so on. She said, I looked out of the windows and named everything I saw. She said, the soup was cold by the time I finished. Laughing, she said, are you still religious? And then when I was a senior in high school, Mamie and I went to one of her performances at Ford's Theater in Washington. And this was her day off, so her stand-in had the lead, and she hosted us. She and Mamie wore pleats and pumps, and Mamie's black dress with red accessories, and Miss Russell in lavender with a beautiful sapphire brooch. They were both stunning. She met us at the front to go in after saying hello, and I looked at her and I said, I won't have to say grace, will I? And she and Mamie both got sparkles in their eyes and giggled appropriately. I thought the picture of the Eisenhowers with Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip would be of interest, as at least Queen Elizabeth is still the monarchy, and of course we just lost Prince Philip. This picture was taken in 1957 and was Queen Elizabeth's first state visit to the United States since her coronation. So it was a pretty historic picture. Throughout the last 15 years of his life, Ike suffered 7 massive heart attacks. The 7th one was the one that got him. At the time, treatment involved lengthy hospital stays. Mamie would take a room next to his, and she would never leave his side when he was sick. The most dramatic was the 6th, when he actually was clinically dead for a time, but they were able to revive him remarkably without brain damage. That was the August before he died for good. When he came around, we went in to see him, and after a couple of minutes, he asked everyone except Mamie to leave the room. We did, and the door closed. We waited outside of the door for her, and she came out giddy as a schoolgirl. And while we didn't expect that, Julie asked her what was up. And she explained, he just gave me the sweetest kiss he's given me in 10 years. When he did pass the next March, there was a state funeral in Washington, and when we took him to Union Station and boarded a 5-day train ride to Abilene, Kansas, we went 35 miles an hour through farmland, towns, and cities. And no matter what area we were in, people lined the tracks. Many held up signs that said, we liked Ike. Watching from the window of the slow-moving train, I wondered how perfect strangers could touch my heart like they did. Meanwhile, Ike's surviving brothers, Edgar and Milton, were also on board. About 2 days into the trip, Milton suffered a heart attack of his own. And Edgar wryly but lightly said, Ike dies, Milton has a heart attack, you'd think everyone is getting old around here. As a side note, he was 83 and engaged to be married at that time. He was playing matchbook poker in the club car with the Secret Service and invited me to join. I'm 14 years old. Admittedly, I was relieved to have something else to focus on, even though he had to teach me how to play it. And just when I was beginning to relax, Mamie entered the coach car abruptly. I thought I could almost see her face turn green and split down the middle while her eyes tightened and she scolded Edgar. This isn't some kind of gala, she said. I was embarrassed and ashamed that I had had a part in what upset her, and went immediately to one of the couches in the club car. And while I tried to be stoic, I couldn't help but cry. She came over to me and gently put her hand on my back, and she said softly, let's go see your grandfather. She, my sister-in-law, Julie, and I walked to the car that carried his coffin. It was painted black on the inside, and an open side door provided afternoon light. The four corners of the coffin were flanked by servicemen, Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines. Each stood razor straight up and looked forward. And protocol had that they would not change their expression or talk. She stood at the head of the coffin, and her eyes got a pool of water in them. She put her hand on the Army soldier's arm and said, "Thank you for looking out for him." His expression never broke, but a small tear appeared in the corner of his eye. Happier notes. These are miscellaneous pictures of how her life was after Ike. She lived another 10 years and never stopped grieving. She was very particular about her home, and there were lots of furnishings that came down the Dowd side, her side of the family. One Victorian rocker that sat on the glass porch near the TV was Granddad's favorite. It was a muted dark tan velvet. He used it to watch the news in Green Acres. When he died, the velvet finish had worn to the linen in some spots. But she normally she would have recovered it, but she left this one the same. And I asked her why once, and she said because it was one of the few things she had left of Ike. It was like a fingerprint. Some said she became a recluse after his death, but that was not true. She remained active until her basic health prevented. She continued involvement with the Republican Party, as you can see in this picture of her wearing a Ford Dole pin. She hosted my sister Susan's wedding reception at the farm and celebrated many occasions with the Nixons. She's shown here at the White House with them and Mr. and Mrs. David Frost before David Frost's relationship with Nixon became famous. And that's me in the middle with her at Susie's reception. Here you see Mamie and me in Columbus, Georgia when I was an Army wife. This was taken in 1977, 2 years prior to her passing. Next is celebrating her 80th birthday at the farm. And while roses were her favorite flower, she was allergic and enjoyed them either from the porch overlooking a bed of roses outside, and the porch was glassed in, so she was protected, or by artificial ones in her crystal vases. Of course, back in the 50s, they were plastic. And I was back at the farm taking some people through, and they had silk roses in her vases. And I said, "Oh, no, that's not accurate. You need to make them plastic." And they were like, "Really?" But anyway. So not knowing this, on her 80th birthday, President Ford sent her 80 long-stemmed red roses. And she kept them long enough to have her picture made with them, and then they were subsequently distributed to some senior homes in Gettysburg. I can't imagine, like, being confronted with this when you're allergic to every bit of it. Mamie continued the snowbird lifestyle after Ike passed away. She spent most winters in Palm Desert or Augusta, Georgia, at the National Golf Course. Here you see her with John Wayne at the El Dorado Country Club in Palm Desert at a Republican Party fundraiser. Next is a picture of Mamie's cabin, as named for her by Augusta National Golf Club. The picture of Granddad and her was of them in the clubhouse in 1975. In 1975, Mamie spent 6 months at Mamie's cabin. I think she felt a lot of comfort because it reminded her of him. And it's still just as they left it. It's a living museum, and people do still go and stay there. But all of her knickknacks and things like that, with the exception of one or two, are still there. As mentioned earlier, she and I became very close throughout my childhood and early young adulthood. A couple of years after I graduated high school, I moved to the D.C. area and went to school as well as worked on Capitol Hill. She was all for me going to school, but worried about me working on the Hill. She said she didn't want me hurt by the chill of politics. As I settled into my new town and job, I learned very quickly about the social scene in Washington. First, the ratio was 7 women to every man. assuming this was due to the amount of administrative support required in government. The men were always quite handsome. However, they were aware that they were handsome and also aware of the odds. It was not difficult to get asked out on a date, but there were signs that it may not be the best situation. Obviously, you would check for a ring or a white break in the tan on the third left finger. Then if he came to pick you up in a station wagon, you did not go. And if a couple of dates went by and you were not invited to his place, no go. There were so many surprises in that area that I got fed off and swore off dating altogether. And that turned out to be my blessing. Luckily, Gettysburg was an hour and 15-minute drive from D.C., so I ended up visiting Mamie every single weekend. I would leave early on Saturday mornings. We would talk all day Saturday about everything from saving money to world affairs to family concerns and reminiscences. And then we would have a nice supper, and on Sunday we would go to church in town. I would leave Sunday afternoon, and I'd call her when I got home to let her know that I was safe. And we would talk several times during the week. It was uncanny at times. If one were thinking about the other, one would call. Her friendship was a gift I will always cherish. She rarely gave press interviews, but she liked Barbara Walters. In September of '79, Barbara Walters came to the farm and did what was to be her last interview. It was precious. Mamie was just herself despite having a sort of stage fright about these and speeches too. At the end, Barbara asked Mamie how she thought Ike would want to be remembered. She thought carefully and slowly, listed his honesty and integrity and love of country. She sort of faded off, and Barbara asked, "How do you want to be remembered?" Clearly taken off guard, she said, "Well, I've never really thought about that." Then she paused and thought and said, "Just a good friend." And her infectious, sparkly-eyed smile beamed from her face. It was only a couple of weeks after that interview that Mamie had a massive stroke on September 25th, just a day after what would have been Dowd's 62nd birthday. I was at home that day recovering from a miscarriage myself. While watching some daytime TV, my story was interrupted by a special report where I saw footage of Mamie being carried into Walter Reed on a gurney with her mouth gaping wide open, and she was a very proper lady, and I just couldn't believe that that was on the TV. Horrified, I called my mother. They said they had not had the chance to tell me yet. She did tell me that she thought it was odd when earlier Mamie had called her from my phone number. No doubt she wanted to support me on the miscarriage, but she had my number, so it must have been as the stroke was occurring. The rest of the family and I went to D.C. immediately to see her at Walter Reed. Most everyone was there the first night, including Dolores and her sister, my Aunt Mike. Midday the next day, most had to go back due to work-related responsibility, and Mamie was deemed stable. I couldn't stand to see her left alone with just the Secret Service and medical personnel, so I arranged with my employer to stay for a while, and a dear friend in the area was kind enough to offer up a stay at her house. Since I was still weak from my miscarriage, the hospital brought in a recliner for me to rest in when I was with her. She slept a lot and was not interested in physical therapy. Often we'd both be snoozing, and I'd open my eyes to see her looking at me and smiling. It was a half smile as her left side was paralyzed from the stroke. One evening they got her out of bed and sat her up for supper, and they put a dentist type of bib on her and served her a finely cut up steak and sides. The steak was cooked to perfection, and I, trying to be very positive, I said, "Well, Mamie, that looks really good." She replied, "Yes, I'm trying to see how much of it I can wear." Sense of humor all the way through. Her talk was garbled, but I got to where I understood it, and she recalled to me that she would listen to her own parents after their strokes and would politely pretend to understand them, but she had no idea what they were saying. I told her, "Too bad, I understand you," and that was good enough. She was worried as time went on. She had a planned luncheon at the farm on Monday with her Washington girlfriends. Since this kind of emulated the bridge parties that they used to have at the farm, I thought she was just going back in time and kind of chalked it up. I assured her it was okay. Finally, after slightly over a month, I needed to go back to Columbus to settle on a house. It was October 31st. I went to her room that day in the morning as I had an afternoon flight. I explained to her that I was going back to Columbus, but mentioned that I'd be back for her birthday, which was to be in 2 weeks. She looked at me as though I'd said nothing, and she said, "I'm glad you came today. I'm going to die tomorrow." I told her she couldn't because she didn't have my permission, and that was something that I had used in previous health crises, and it made her laugh. And she would even tell staff that she couldn't die. Her granddaughter said no. But this time was different. Her face was motionless, and she closed her eyes. So I kissed her on the forehead and I told her I loved her, but she slept. I hope she heard me. I returned to Columbus, and sure enough, I got a phone call at 1:30 a.m., November 1st, Eastern Time. It was my dad telling me she had died. Fortunately, he was there all day, so she was not alone. I could not believe it, and obviously was up for the rest of the morning. At daybreak, I was in my kitchen that overlooked an extensive backyard. There was a window at the sink that viewed the yard. It was mostly grass. It was a good play area, but I was rinsing some dishes and putting them in the washer when I looked out of the window, and there was this exotic, bright pink, maybe Mamie pink flower shining in the sunrise that I'd never seen before. And it appeared out of nowhere overnight in our yard. And my first thought was, Mimi? I went back to D.C. that day, this time to honor her. I learned from my father that amongst the things she had taken to Walter Reed was her 50th wedding anniversary dress, the one she emphatically told me she wanted to be buried in, and as far as I know, she is. And the library has verified as far as they know she is too. So, this is the back of the farmhouse. The reason I show you this is it shows two trees. Originally, both trees were the size of the one on the left, pre-Civil War. As you can see, the one on the right is a much younger one. It used to be a tree of the same age as the one on the left. When I would visit her from Washington, she stayed in bed when we had our chats and spent a lot of time there as well. Her bedroom window overlooked the old tree, and when I would come in, she would tell me about the birds, the squirrels, and various wildlife with their interaction with each other. She almost cased it as a small town, surmising on what was going through their minds and how they felt about each other and who was fighting with who, and it reminded me of the daytime dramas she liked so much. About a month after her passing, I visited the farm, and the National Park Service had taken it over, but told me they hadn't done anything to it yet. It was as she left it. The first thing I noticed that in a casual chair in the living room lay some memorabilia from their 50th wedding anniversary. She was a neat freak, so seeing it in that chair struck me that she must have been looking at it the day she had her stroke. Then in her dressing room, there was a scale. Attached to it was a calendar where she'd been recording her weight, and sure enough, a luncheon was scheduled with her Washington girlfriends for the Monday after she died. And finally, I went outside, and that old tree that was outside of her window was gone. I asked the ranger what happened, and he told me the tree died several days after Mimi did. So that's the replacement tree. And back in my youth, before I abused my voice tremendously, I used to write and sing songs with my guitar. And while staying with her at Walter Reed, I wrote a song as a way to salve the grief. And in closing, I'd like to share the words with you. I'll spare you my singing voice. I call it Mamie's Song. Wake up. Yes, it's morning. You've seen it before. Well, let's sing a song. You've sung them and more. Now, why is your mind so much stronger than me? Your letters are written. Your spirit is free, lucky you. Your walk through this life has been proud, yes, indeed. You smiled at people. You've helped children in need. Now you slumber while I know you're in pain. You once met the queen. Now your fingers are lame, yet you smile. It's another day on the calendar. How'd 10 years slip by? Tell me, how'd you live life so beautifully? Did the old man ever see you cry? And when he laughed, did you laugh too? How was the life so sweet, so complete? Now the horse and the carriage wait by your side. The president's widow is leaving with pride. You can't go now, it's not time for your sleep. Those still living need your spirit to keep us alive. But is this farewell, perfect lady? Let me touch you one more time. Let me savor this last moment while your warmth keeps my eyes dry. You're leaving me now, so empty somehow, but I'll cherish the memories you've placed in my heart. Because you say you're contented with just being you. The whole world has loved you, and the days are not new. Stand up and fight it, spunk is your way. But if God must greet you for my sake when you go, please know I love you, and you'll always live on deep in this heart and soul of mine. Fare thee well. And this was put together with the help of the Eisenhower Library on the pictures and such, and I wanted to give them credit. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Oops. I'm not a professional. Don't try this at home. Thank you. I think I might have